right. I think we're
Hi
live.
there. We are
Hello.
live, yes.
Woo.
And we're just by ourselves at the moment, but people will hopefully tune in a
Yeah,
bit.
people will stream in and for exactly. So
And
should be
hopefully
fun.
ask questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that when we'll definitely.
Yeah.
Um,
So I guess we should officially start now. I should warn you that I have a friend who's staying here, and he's going to be leaving at some point, but he's promised to be quiet as a mouse when he leaves.
that's right.
But we may hear the door clicking. So anyway, it happens. And I have my windows open, because it's so nice out now and not so hot. Anyway, let's do this thing. So
Should I start or you want to start? You start. Good.
I'll start. Yeah. Okay. So greetings, Doug. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. How are you, John?
I'm good now that it's cleared up a bit. It's not quite as humid, and we have a more interesting presidential race.
Yes.
That kind of changed a lot of attitude, and kind of refreshing and fun to watch.
Yeah. Much like the temperature outside, much refreshing.
Yeah, exactly. Very excited. I personally was always a fan of Kamala Harris's, even though she screwed up her first run. But anyway, it's gonna be fun.
Yeah,
gonna be fun. So, what did we decide to talk about today? Yes, the Bodhisattva Ideal.
Bodhisattva Ideal, always a good question, always a good topic to discuss. And if anybody has questions or comments, they're welcome to put it in here. We're doing this, recording this live as well on YouTube. And for those of you listening on the podcast, we will try to remember to state the questions if we get any of your comments and stuff like that.
Yeah. So we got a few people have signed in, so let's see what happens.
Yes.
And yeah.
A nice comment already. So a couple of comments, which is nice. Good afternoon. Good evening. Thank you for the comments so far. Yes.
Okay. So the Bodhisattva Ideal, you first.
Well,
how does it relate to the early traditions? I guess that's other than the Buddha himself, who was by all means a Bodhisattva, although he was fully awakened, but he was there for the awakening of others. But there are many factors here.
I mean, and there's a really good long paper, short book by Bhikkhu Analayo on the genesis of the Bodhisattva Ideal and its development. And I'll try to remember to leave a link to the book because it's available for free on the web in our notes because it's really worth a read. It's it's pretty dense. It's he's a scholar and all, but it's a really good.
Right, and that was written for scholars, as I recall that particular article, as opposed to for us, us non-scholars.
That's right.
But but it's still even when he writes for scholars, he's very readable.
Oh yeah, no, I think so.
Yeah, it's been a while. I read that a long time ago myself, and or whenever it showed up. But so what do you remember from it?
Yeah, well, it's a big thing, but and I did a couple of videos on the topic a while back. But basically the idea is that when the Buddha was alive, there really wasn't a Bodhisattva ideal. That came later. So, I mean, during the Buddha's lifetime, the path of the followers was to become an arahant. And the Buddha was the Buddha. There was, and the Bodhisattva referred to the Buddha before he became enlightened, and in some contexts just referred to the Buddha's lifetime between when he left home and when he became enlightened, that the period in which he was searching for the path. So it was, the idea of a bodhisattva was relatively restricted. Now, bodhisattva means sort of a being bound towards enlightenment, if you like.
Right.
So, and then what happened is that after the Buddha passed away, there were a number of different developments that happened that Analayo goes through. Basically, you have a growing sense of what a Buddha was. So a Buddha became something quite grand, almost deified.
Right.
And the idea of the Buddha's past became also expanded greatly. So although the Buddha did discuss past lifetimes, at least so far as we know, during his life, at least that's the recorded history we have.
Right.
That we get lots of what are called Jataka tales talking about the Buddha's past lives. Many of those, or much of that material, is believed to be after the Buddha's lifetime, and in fact comes from stories from India that were basically sort of adopted by Buddhists, and a character in the story was then identified as the Buddha in a prior lifetime, and so on.
And he was sometimes not even he was often an animal, or
and different forms, and
they're
so
beautiful.
on.
They're really fun, some of these tales, and interesting, helpful.
And so over time, the ideal developed of not just becoming an arahant, but becoming a Buddha. And that's the Bodhisattva ideal, is to become a Buddha rather than an arahant. And there also developed at the same time the idea that Buddhas were able to remain active in the world after becoming Buddhas, which is a sort of a separate but related issue. So the idea was that you would sort of put off your arahantship or Buddhahood, for a long period of time in order to help other people become enlightened. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that sort of comes together over the centuries after the Buddha's lifetime into this exalted idea of becoming a bodhisattva rather than an arahant. And there was tension, of course, between these two paths, and oftentimes in the Mahayana tradition, they're sort of denigrate the arahant path as the Hinayana, as the lesser vehicle, as opposed to the Bodhisattva path, which is the Mahayana, the greater vehicle, which I think is not very useful. But that's how it gets. That's how the rhetoric got developed.
And that's also so. Although I've always found that interesting, because I don't. One who is an arahant these days doesn't go around generally claiming that we talked about this in our last session, doesn't normally go around claiming they are an arahant, but hopefully they are teaching, which in itself is an act of compassion, which in itself is, what supports other people in their own path. And so, the bodhisattva is one who, holds off their own awakening for the sake of all beings to awaken. And, that in a way is what the Buddha did. And obviously the Buddha was fully awakened. So we're told, of course, and we are, no reason not to believe that. But there was that, not a schism, but there was that place where the paramis kind of evolved. The parami, the
perfections
of the heart, which are qualities of a Buddha. And if we cultivate these qualities, if we cultivate these qualities, then we are on our way. We are at least aspiring, in a particular way. And I think that's a really beautiful part of practice. In fact, to me, it's more important in a way than meditation is, to be really aware of where these qualities need to be boosted in our own lives, and where we're falling short, in a sense. Because
do you remember all the paramis? I don't remember the paramis. I remember
let's see. We have generosity, we have ethical
patience,
morality, we have renunciation, we have patience, we have truthfulness, we have determination, uh,
There are all these
loving
lists.
kindness, metta and equanimity, and I'm missing something, but I can pull it up as we are speaking.
Yeah.
Because I'm well aware. Yeah, I mean, I'll pull them up because I have a list of them. I always, I know, I don't know about you, but whenever we have a number, I always fall short. I can never remember them all, even though that's the whole point.
Yeah, that's the reason they have the numbers. So you say, oh, I must have forgotten one or two, you know? And these you don't find in the early tradition, by the way, the paramis. I mean, you find them individually discussed, but not as a list in the early tradition. So it's interesting the way the path, the practice gets sort of changed over time, you know, because in the early tradition, there's no discussion of paramis. Instead, you discuss things like the Eightfold Path and so on. But it's all the same in a sense, or very similar anyway.
Hang on a second, I just lost what I was. So these, you know, and so as we are, in a way, as we are cultivating these qualities, we are, I mean, as I understand it, you know, as we do this, we are being, you know, as when I've taught class, one of the classes I taught on the paramis was called being Buddhas, I think. You know, because in a sense, that's where you're working at. Okay, what did I leave out? Yes, determination, wisdom,
wisdom,
energy. Those are the two I missed. So generosity, morality, renunciation, wisdom, energy, virya, patience, kanti, truthfulness, satya, resolution, adhidana, loving kindness, metta, and equanimity. And I think in the Mahayana, there are only 5. They've sort of condensed them.
Yeah, they're different lists, I think, in different places. So take the list that makes you happy.
Yeah, exactly. But they're really useful, and they're important practices, and you know, from what we understand, or what I understand, and maybe some of our listeners can affirm this, is that in Buddhist countries, you know, these qualities are much more important than meditation. Cultivating these qualities of generosity, and cultivating the qualities of morality or ethical behavior, and renunciation and patience. You know, these are as or more important than actually the practice of meditation, which was, you know, not necessarily taught at all to those who were not monastics. And even
That's true.
Probably all monastics didn't learn them. So, and then, you know, of course, in the later traditions, there are, I don't know how many different bodhisattvas there are. I mean, you know, mythical and otherwise.
Infinite, I would say, probably.
Really you know, it's really kind of wonderful, you know, kind of these are ideals of, you know, and so when we talk about the Bodhisattva ideal, then there were these bodhisattvas that were talked about who one would aspire to be like, one presumes, and there are some that, you know, of course, treat these bodhisattvas as actual beings, you know, which is for many people helpful. I know, you know, the idea of Avalokiteshvara of Kuan Yin, because they changed. I mean, they're the same bodhisattva, but a different name and a different image, depending on the culture, to some degree. You know, that bodhisattva of compassion is for many, you know, there are all practices around each of these bodhisattvas to sort of help cultivate that quality. And not only to cultivate that quality, I would say, but to bring in the power of that bodhisattva into one's own life.
But these are sort of more celestial bodhisattvas that you're talking about now, rather than
exactly, yeah.
Like, I mean, because each of us, you know, is or could be a bodhisattva as well if we, you know, take on the bodhisattva vows and you know, sort of make that the direction of our practice. Then, you know, we ourselves are bodhisattvas at that point.
Right. But the celestial ones are sort of models, or again, it's like the idea. It's like, what are we? The Kuan Yin hearing the cries of the world and being able to be fully present for those cries, and just in the hearing, something is happening. We are responding in a way that is a response of a bodhisattva, because we are responding from that place of compassion. So
yeah, and you don't find this in the early traditions at all.
No,
really.
Not at all. Yeah. Yeah, because the Buddha was here. It was, or present. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an important ideal for sure. Otherwise, why are we bothering, in a sense? Unless we're just doing it for our own sake. But are we ever really doing it for our own sake? And when we talk about, sharing the merit of our practice, obviously that implies that we're not doing it with our, for our own sake. But even that practice, I wonder, like, where that practice evolved from. Maybe this, the idea of sharing the merit of our practice.
Yeah, I mean, that again is not really something that you find in the early tradition, because the merit is not shareable, not directly anyway. I mean, indirectly, yes, because you do benefits to other people because of your own merits. Your own merits allow you the capacity to do benefits to other people, which of course then may allow them to do meritorious deeds that give them good karma, but you can't literally transfer your own karma to somebody else. At least in the early tradition, that's the way it's understood.
But it's I mean, I think the phrasing is the merit that we gain. That is like, so that karma that we gain impacts other people. I mean, we say it's shared for the well-being of all, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah, you can't. Yeah. You wouldn't want my car. No. It's like, you can't. It's like, how do you we don't hand it over in that way.
But I mean, I think that
but it has an impact.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we have to look at the two traditions, the early tradition and the later tradition, as sort of two ways of negotiating practice, and they're similar in many ways, because in both senses we're not really. I mean, we're never really just focusing on ourselves. We're focusing on the world through ourselves or through our practice. But in the early tradition, there's more the sense that we are very fundamentally beset by all kinds of mental delusions. And so if we just sort of go out and try to help people, we're likely to screw things up in fundamental ways, because our greed and our hatred is going to get in the way, which it generally does. I mean, if we try to go out and do things, we get angry. We want things our way. We all know
this. Yourself.
Well, at least I know this for myself.
I know. It's absolutely true.
So, I mean, you in the early tradition, you work on yourself first. That's the focus of your effort. If you're going to go the whole way, then you become an arahant. But even in the early tradition, people who were not arahants did teach. I mean, clearly, Ananda taught before he was enlightened. There were a number of very famous lay people in the early in the suttas who taught monks, even though they themselves were not enlightened. So there wasn't the sense that you had to wait until you become an arahant to help the world through teaching or whatever. You could help the world all along. So I mean that, but nevertheless, there's this idea that we want to become perfected, quote unquote perfected, in order to be at our best when helping others, because we will purify our minds and therefore purify our intentions and our actions. In the later tradition, there's more of a switch to emphasize the action first, and the helping others. And that just takes a little more precedence. But this, I mean, in a certain sense, it's a difference of degree, not of kind, I think.
Yeah, and I would think, I mean, that it's not like it's do this and then do that. It's more like as we evolve in our own practice, the other qualities also evolve, and we have this, and it's so typical, right? It's not just in Buddhism, but it's in all religions. It's like there's this and then there's this, and like you choose, as if individuals are choosing, and and there's like, oh, let me try, or whatever. I mean, it's like a yeah, and so and even now, of course, in this country, and or in the West, things are getting, in many cases, and I'm an example of that to some degree. We sort of I'm an omnivore. I pick, I take from various traditions when it feels like the appropriate thing for me at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just noticing this question that came in from Tony. Yeah.
Put it up here on the screen.
Okay. But an argument we made that teaching what you know is actually part of the path to become fully enlightened. Kind of like how you don't really understand something unless you explain it. I believe in that. Yes. I don't know about becoming the enlightenment side of it, but I definitely feel like I love teaching something I don't clearly know, because it does help me gain greater clarity around it, and then take it from there.
Yeah, and certainly in the monastic tradition, as I understand it, in the Theravada, and I'm sure this is true in the Mahayana as well, you were supposed to teach. I mean, it wasn't just that you could if you wanted to, but monks were really sort of obligated to teach, at least at some point. I mean, some part of their training was to give Dharma lessons to lay people, for example. I don't think that was an optional. I think that was kind of understood to be necessary, and probably for this reason, because you learn it better if you have to explain it to somebody else. It's when you realize that you can't explain it very well that you sort of think, oh, maybe I don't understand that as well as I should. I mean, I think that's true.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
We also have another comment.
Yeah.
I believe, as from Nathaniel Arnquist asks or says, I believe there are times in the sutras where people become enlightened while giving a Dhamma talk. I don't know that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is. I don't remember.
Certainly when listening,
certainly when listening.
Buddha giving a Dhamma talk.
Yeah, listening. But I'm not sure when giving. Maybe. I mean, it'd be interesting to know if you have a sutta reference. Let me know. I would love to see that, because it would be interesting. But certainly when listening. No, yeah, it hasn't happened to me.
I mean, you might have like thunderbolts of wisdom that come through as you're giving a Dharma talk, for sure. Because just as you were just saying, it's like as you were like trying to explain something that you haven't explained before, in that process of speaking to it and speaking from your own experience, suddenly something shifts. And there's a greater clarity that comes through. That isn't. That's a moment of waking up to something, but I wouldn't call it a moment of. I wouldn't call it enlightenment. I mean,
it could be,
but I could be wrong. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of. I guess. Yeah. I mean, at least let me put it this way: it wouldn't surprise me if somebody became enlightened that way, but I just don't know of any particular examples.
Yeah. So I think what's really important, I mean, from my place, is these perfections, and recognizing particularly the values in generosity and morality and patience in particular. Renunciation is an interesting practice and an interesting place to look. When I think of renunciation, I think of what can I let go of,
Mm.
You know, what can I let go of that would actually, benefit the world? And it would be sort of the practice within the paramis, not just benefiting me. And so if we think of those practices as not just benefiting ourselves, but they're benefiting others. And generosity is an obvious case in point. If we are practicing generosity, we are opening our own heart, and then we are benefiting somebody else through that generosity, which could just be the generosity of teaching, or it could just be the generosity of caring for someone, whatever it is. Those are all, in a way, acts of a bodhisattva. I mean, that is an example of us, how a bodhisattva would be. And so to some degree, it's like, well, we just, what do they say? Fake it till you make it, right? It's like you do it until like something has shifted in the heart completely. I mean, it's not really faking it, but it's like you're doing, something is changing as you act in these ways. And
yeah. I mean, and you're not faking it, because if you're really if you're being generous, then you're being generous.
Right.
You may be forcing yourself to be generous, let me put it that way. But nevertheless, I mean, for the Buddha anyway, any generosity was good. I mean, of course, it was better to do generous things selflessly, and he said that too. But he said, look, I mean, anything you can do that's generous is good, and so you shouldn't, don't beat up on yourself, if you're sort of pushing yourself a little bit. I mean, that's normal. And certainly the Buddha himself, whenever he gave a talk to lay people, he began with generosity. I mean, that was number one for him. So, yeah.
Well, we should probably do another podcast on generosity, because there's so much to be said on that topic.
Oh yeah.
I think what's really interesting. So, and this will remind me to, and we'll put this in the chat, in the show notes. My partner Upayati and I are doing a retreat coming up in a couple of weeks, up in the Hudson Valley, not that far from New York City, a couple of hours, and it's called Courageous Heart, Courageous Mind. I should know. Hold on. Yeah, finding grace in the monk. Courageous Heart, Radiant Mind, finding grace in the muck. And of course, we scheduled this at a time when things were feeling pretty yucky, and they are still pretty yucky. I mean, in the not just in the political world here, but in the world itself, right? And how do we handle all of that? How are we with that? And it's, we intend to really speak to these paramis and to, specific bodhisattvas, and how we bring them in. We can bring them into our practice if it's helpful. So, I just put that out there as an opportunity for people who would like to practice, that we do have space available. And I know many of you are not anywhere near this part of the world, but if you are, something to consider if you want a beautiful place to retreat.
And you'll leave a link to that in the notes.
Yeah, and it's relatively short retreat. It's only 5 nights. Very good Korean food, though, because it's at the Won Dharma Center, which is a Korean tradition.
You'll have coffee.
Yes, we will have coffee. Coffee is available, and coffee is one of those things that you and I, of course, are dependent. I don't want to say dependent on, but feels that way sometimes. Yeah, but we certainly enjoy. We enjoy it, and it's a way of supporting the show. And so we hope you can contribute.
Pitch in a cup of coffee.
Yeah, through diggingthedharma.com. Yeah, and so this is a place of real inquiry, this notion of the Bodhisattva ideal. And in a way, it's just saying we're not practicing for ourselves only. We are practicing for the betterment of the world. And as we do that, in this case, just referring to the name of our retreat, we can actually find our way through the muck. We don't get stuck in the muck because, we're doing everything we can, through our own actions and through our own open heart and good heart, to hopefully impact those around us.
Yeah. And also, I think spending time recharging our own batteries so that we can take it back out into the world, because I think we do need that as well.
Yeah. So, all right, friends. Yes, thank you for the comment, Tony. Nice segue. I think you meant toward the coffee. Well, it's one of our specialties, segueing any topic toward the subject of coffee.
Yeah, that's what we're John's particularly good at it.
Yeah. Anyway, we look forward to seeing you next week, probably around the same time. And until then, keep digging the Dharma.
Keep digging the Dharma. Yeah.